advised. This is 10-Minute Murder.
Far too often, investigations are pulled into the wrong direction because of rumors about witchcraft, black magic, and human sacrifices. With one mention of devil worship, paganism, or Wiccan beliefs, an otherwise normal case can cause mass hysteria. In one 2015 triple homicide, which occurred in Pensacola, Florida, allegations of a ritualistic killing almost led investigators on a wild goose chase, distracting them from the killer's much more mundane motive. Still, the case has never quite escaped the nickname it was given in those early days, the Blue Moon Murders. It was the 31st of July, 2015, 3 days after the murders, when the bodies of 3 victims were located. The Escambia County Sheriff's Office had sent deputies to 47-year-old Richard Smith's house to carry out a welfare check because he had failed to show up for his job at the Department of Homeland Security. Richard worked as an IT specialist, and he had a reliable reputation. So when there was no sign of him at work, one of his colleagues reported him as missing. When nobody came to answer the door, the deputies entered Richard Smith's house, where they found him dead. Alongside Richard's body were 2 other bodies: Richard's brother, 49-year-old John Smith, and their mother, 77-year-old Vonsil Smith. David Morgan, Escambia County Sheriff, gave a statement shortly after the bodies were discovered, saying, quote, "The elements of this case are odd at best. We have a very reclusive family. Obviously, we've canvassed the neighborhood and spoken to people who have lived there for years and years. Neighbors have related to us that they've never met members of this family." All 3 of the victims had been killed in the same way. They had been severely beaten with a large claw hammer, and their throats had been cut with a sharp blade. However, Richard Smith had some additional injuries. Unlike his mother and brother, he also sustained a bullet wound to the head. Investigators believe that the killer shot Richard before the rest of the murders took place, making sure that he was incapacitated and unable to fight back. Another unusual detail was that the victims had been separated from each other. The bodies were found in different rooms, and all 3 bodies had been covered with blankets, which is usually a sign that the killer knew the victim or feels some sort of remorse about their death. But it asks the question, why would a remorseful killer brutally murder 3 victims at once? Shortly after the 3 bodies were found, rumors began to circulate about the case. It was already unusual for 3 members of the same family to be found dead, and because the Smiths were known for being reclusive and keeping to themselves, the element of mystery that surrounded the case made the local community even more fascinated. Soon, there was one theory that was especially common. Many people believed that witchcraft played a role in the deaths. And it wasn't just the local gossip circles who believed this. The sheriff's department did too. At a press conference shortly after the murders, one local sheriff told the astonished reporter, quote, "It's witchcraft. I'll say that right now." Bizarrely, one of the biggest pieces of witchcraft evidence that the sheriff's department leaned on was circumstantial. There had been a blue moon coming up at the same time the family was murdered. A blue moon is the name of the beer that I drink when I'm playing top golf most of the time. And it's also a nickname for when there's an extra full moon in a lunar cycle. It's a rare phenomenon, and it takes place about once every 3 years. It's how the phrase "once in a blue moon" came about. But the sheriff's department weren't only basing the black magic theory off the date of the blue moon. They happened to already have a key suspect in the killings, and they knew that the suspect was the practitioner of an unusual religion. So unusual, in fact, that they believed that he might be capable of carrying out a ritualistic murder. But the suspect wasn't some stranger in a dark cloak who had staked out the house and sacrificed the family to the devil. In fact, he was someone that all 3 of the victims knew very well, because he was related to all 3 of them. His name was Donald Hartung, and he was Von Seal's 63-year-old son from a previous relationship, making him both Richard and John's half-brother. Even when investigators first broke the news to Donald that 3 members of his family had been brutally killed, they noticed that he was behaving very oddly. There was no sign of grief or anger that usually accompanies this time of tragedy. Instead, he almost seemed too calm and composed, like he was reading from a script or reciting something he memorized. One of the detectives who talked to Donald that day, Detective Matt Infinger, described Donald's first response to finding out the news about the murders, saying, quote, "He was really nonchalant and non-emotional when I told him the whole family was dead. Looking back on it, it was like he prepared himself for questioning. It was like he already knew his family was dead, and he kept his composure and showed no emotion the whole time." On the same day that the bodies were found, local deputies raided Donald Hartung's nearby home. Inside, they found the blood-stained outfit he had been wearing at the time of the murder, a claw hammer, and a blade that matched the murder weapons, and also what they called a worship room. It was a perfect media storm. The news had only just broken about the bodies being found, and now the news reported that some kind of pagan altar had been found inside the killer's house. Sheriff Morgan himself later fed into the rumors about black magic, saying, quote, "The crime appears to have been a part of a witchcraft practice linked to the 31st blue moon, a reference to the second of 2 full moons that appear in a calendar month. When the media became aware of the connection of the July blue moon, they gave Donald a nickname, calling him the Blue Moon Killer." However, all the excitement generated by the idea of a ritualistic murder didn't last. Shortly after the Blue Moon Killer received his nickname, investigators stated that the witchcraft theories had been wrong. There was no evidence that the 3 victims had been murdered as a part of a pagan ritual, and the timing of the blue moon seemed to be just a red herring. In fact, there was circumstantial evidence that Donald's motive had been much more simple. Like so many other murders, it had taken place because of money. One of Donald's co-workers came forward telling investigators that she remembered him bragging about when his mother passed away, he would receive all of her inheritance due to being her oldest living heir. Unfortunately for Donald, his mother had done everything in her power to prevent this. Von Seal wanted to leave all of her money and assets to her other sons, Richard and John, who were less well off than Donald, and she felt like needed the money more. In Von Seal's will, she had written, quote, "I intentionally make no provision herein to the benefit of my son Donald Hartung Jr., not for lack of love or affection, but because he has sufficient assets of his own." But to Donald, it didn't matter that he didn't need the money as much as his younger half-brothers. It also didn't matter that his mother was only trying to be fair. To him, it felt like a deliberate slight by his entire family. In his eyes, he had been wronged, and he was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. He had murdered his 2 half-brothers and his mother in one violent attack, trying to ensure that there was no way to get in between him and the money that he felt he deserved, a total sum of almost $900,000. On the 27th of October 2015, Donald Hartung was placed under arrest, facing 3 counts of premeditated first-degree murder with a weapon. At his trial, it took the jury an hour to reach their decision. The Blue Moon Killer was found guilty of all 3 murder charges. He was sentenced to 3 life sentences to be served consecutively, ensuring that he would never kill again or have an opportunity to cash in on his dead mother's life insurance. That is 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, the host, and thank you so much for listening today. And if this is your first time checking out 10-Minute Murder, welcome. I'm super pumped that you're here. Please make sure you subscribe now so that you can catch up on all the back episodes and never miss any of the new ones. Also, connect with me on social media and see the visuals of what we talk about here on the podcast. And if you like this episode, leave a rating and review on Apple, Spotify, any place that's possible. Your positive feedback is very much appreciated. And quickly, a couple of email questions. 2 of them today because they're short. Let's see. You've mentioned that you live in the South on past episodes. What's it like having romantic partners that are also your cousins? That's from Jeremy in Idaho. First of all, Jeremy, rude. But I don't live in Mississippi, so I can't tell you what that's like. So, sorry about that. Funny guy. But in Jeremy's defense, he's probably been out in the sun, digging up potatoes, and the heat's just cooking his brain, so he doesn't know any better. And the next one, hey Joe, love the show. Do you do commercials or something besides this podcast? You sound like you would be good at it. Mallory in Tennessee. Hey Mallory, thank you for the email. And the answer is yes. For a very long time, I've done commercial voices. Well, not voices, but my voice on commercials. I can't do character voices because, first of all, they make me feel awkward, and second, I just can't do it. For years, I was the voice of a shopping center company that has centers all over the country, and specifically a couple of them in Tennessee, so you've probably heard my voice there. And I already answered Mallory in the email, so she knows that answer already. But I brought it here to the podcast because I get that question quite a bit. People will email and tell me they heard my voice in different places other than the podcast, and they're like, you've got a voice twin out there somewhere. Maybe, but usually it's just me. Okay, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening to 10 Minute Murder.